Welcome to Building Healthy Relationships, the 4 Habits podcast, helping you enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life. Here are your hosts, Dr. Andrea and Jon Taylor-Cummings, recognized authorities on the subjects of improving work relationships and cultures, as well as couple and home relationships.
Well, hello and a warm welcome to all our guests and viewers from around the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. It is really great to have you. Today, we're delighted to be in conversation with Kate Grussing CBE. Kate, welcome. Good to have you on the call.
Thank you, Andrea and Jon. I'm excited to be here.
We're so looking forward to the conversation. And of course, we need to do the proper introduction so our guests will understand the power of the woman that we have on the call with us. So
I think that says it very well, that the power of the woman
power
is, as you will see. So Kate Grussing CBE is the managing director and founder of Sapphire Partners, a leading executive search and advisory firm specializing in finding and placing exceptional, diverse talent in senior leadership roles and on improving gender diversity within boards and executive teams, working with clients across various industries to identify and recruit top-tier candidates.
Yes.
Very impressive. So her early career includes a stint in corporate finance at Morgan Stanley and following her MBA as a strategy consultant at McKinsey in London and New York. That was followed by a range of senior strategic roles at JP Morgan in London before setting up Sapphire Partners. Now, Kate is often interviewed by journalists on and off the record on issues relating to career, not to her, but to career transitions, non-executives, financial services, and women in the city and in business more broadly. She's been said to have one of the best networks of any women with women in the UK. Fabulous. We're going to hear a bit more about that.
How's that for a connection?
Exactly. And certainly within financial services. She was named as one of Red Magazine's Red Hot Women for her work mentoring and championing corporate flexibility. And she was shortlisted for the CBI, that's the Confederation of British Industry, for their first Women's Award. She was also named in the list of 100 women making a difference by the International Alliance of Women and was recently named as a companion of the Chartered Management Institute. Now, Kate serves, as you might imagine, on numerous advisory boards, including Rare Recruitment, Wellesley College, and Dartmouth's Tuck School in the USA. She's also a trustee of the New London Institute of Imagination and an active formal and informal mentor to a wide range of young talent with a focus on Black and ethnic minorities, which is music to our ears. She was awarded the CBE, that's the Commander of the Order of the British Empire, in 2023 for her services to women in business. This honor recognizes her significant contributions to promoting gender diversity and supporting the advancement of women in the corporate world.
Wow.
So that said, you can see why it is our absolute delight, pleasure, privilege to have you with us, Kate.
I think the first thing we should say is thank you for the work that you do on behalf of women and Black and ethnic minorities in advancing the recruitment, the representation on corporate, at senior levels. Just a thank you for being here and a thank you for the work that you do. And so we have to understand a little bit more of the background and what's driving the passion for the work that you do now, Kate.
No, well, thank you for that really generous introduction. And it takes a village. So thank you for the podcast and the invitation to be here today, but also for your broader work in supporting leadership of all shapes, sizes, colors, genders, backgrounds.
Yeah.
And I feel privileged to do something that I think is so important, and that I'm in a fortunate position to be able to help move the needle.
Yeah.
I get to meet so many amazing people, both leaders and aspiring leaders. And I know that talent is pretty evenly distributed, but yet it's not evenly represented.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what really inspires me is getting to meet incredibly driven, committed, passionate leaders and high potentials like both of you, and realizing that we all can play a role helping to improve the representation.
Yes.
Whether that is of Black leaders or Asian leaders or women or those who are neurodiverse. And that it's finding those hidden gems and helping to shine their facets when the facets are already there. That is my great privilege.
Amazing.
I love
And
the way she put that there, right there. Talent is evenly distributed, but not evenly represented.
yeah,
And I think that's what's missing quite often.
opportunity is not. Absolutely. So, Kate, what got you into this?
Such an interesting question. I had a pretty typical corporate career for the better part of 20 years, as John mentioned in his kind introduction. And I realized as I looked around in my early 40s at how few senior women of my generation were still standing in both consulting and investment banking, which are I saw as both areas that attracted really ambitious talent.
Mhm.
And certainly women had gone into both of those fields in high numbers when I was coming out of business school or coming out of university, but they hadn't stayed.
Yeah.
And so it was trying to understand, well, where had my peer group gone? Because it felt lonely.
Yeah.
And so then being in a position of influence, trying to help identify, first at McKinsey, where I worked on some of the early research on looking at the war for talent. And McKinsey both held a mirror up to itself as well as then it shared that with its clients. And also then being in a leadership role at JP Morgan and trying to understand why there were so few women leaders. And obviously it was both a supply and a demand issue. And that's where I thought I can do something about this. And I was getting frustrated opening the FT and reading another article about someone suing or a class action suit or a senior leader resigning and thinking, hold on, I want to be part of the solution and helping companies do a better job of attracting, retaining, and developing high caliber talent.
That's amazing. And, it resonates for us on so many levels because my
Absolutely.
background is management consulting. John's is investment banking. And we started a recruitment company, a search and selection company in the early days to recruit senior level executives back into the consulting and the banking industry. Shamefully, this is back in the 1990s, we bought into the mentality, especially in the consulting industry at the time, that if you were a young woman with children, you wouldn't be able to do the job because you can't travel and so on. And I know what it's like to deselect people without even considering the talent just because of their circumstances. What are the things that you've been zeroing in on with companies to help them create that space for women to want to stay and to thrive whatever life stage they're at?
Could you word that question again?
Yeah, so what are the things that you've been seeing or encouraging companies to pay attention to help women thrive regardless of the stage of life that they're in, especially in the consulting and banking world?
So I think our clients at Sapphire Partners have realized that they need to be more flexible in considering career tracks and promotion cycles and route to partner. And careers are long and they are often a labyrinth. And women's careers typically are less linear.
Mm.
Doesn't mean that they're less ambitious, but their clocks are on a slightly different cycle often. And clearly many very ambitious men and women decide not to necessarily have families, so they don't have the same caring responsibilities. But women can often be discounted at that really crucial stage of their career when they've proved their technical skills, let's say in their mid-30s, when their bosses might think, oh, well, does she really want to move to Hong Kong? Or what will her partner think of that opportunity that's going to have her on the road 80% of the time? And so I see my job as a search consultant helping to take away any implicit or explicit bias and helping to shine a light on someone's potential. And if someone has taken a year or two longer to, let's say, reach a senior manager level or become a vice president at a bank, in a scheme of a long career, that really doesn't matter in the least.
Yeah.
And so often women sometimes can be their own worst enemies. They're very loyal. They keep their heads down. They don't return headhunters' calls. They may not have a CV or a bio that's updated. They may not be on LinkedIn because they want to have some sort of privacy. And so my role when I was in-house at JP Morgan or McKinsey was to certainly encourage my colleagues to be brave and putting their hand up for a project or an assignment, and not to be too self-deprecating or too modest. Women often refer to, well, it was a team effort. Well, that's important, but actually sometimes you have to claim the credit too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what I heard you saying there, Kate, is, do not expect your typical guy CV for a woman in a particular role that you're looking for there, because life will have happened, and whatever that looks like, and if there are children involved, it ain't a straight line. It's not a simple trajectory, and we have to be more understanding of that. And as Andrew was saying, back in the day when we were doing the recruiting thing, I think we clearly weren't as mature as we are now. Our experiences, so this was Andrea in consulting, this was pre children for us, where the expectation was typically she was gone on a Monday morning, back on a Thursday evening, and in our minds we just figured, okay, well, if you have kids, that's never going to work, so maybe consulting isn't the right career for women at that stage in their lives. And that was an assumption that we took without factoring in the I guess that was also against the background of organizations in those days who didn't have the flexibility, didn't have the organizational support to allow women to be able to have their careers while having children. It was just that the support structure just wasn't there.
That was the interesting thing, and I'm sure, which is why the work that you're doing is so important and so courageous and so powerful. It wasn't so much that we thought they couldn't do it, because I thought I could do it, to have a family and be a consultant. But the prevailing mindset at the time was, don't even shortlist those. If you want to be successful in, placing somebody with us and getting paid, go for the people that that they're looking for. It was more that driving it. But what was interesting is that once we had children, I started proactively looking for women who had families, because they don't mess around at work, right? They get in, they get on with the job. There's no time messing about at the water cooler. What's your experience, your sense of that?
No, I think I'm hugely optimistic. They're more really driven, ambitious, talented, experienced women than ever.
Yeah.
And many of those women might have a stay-at-home partner. Many of those women may have decided actually having children wasn't part of their priorities. And so I think what's key for a hiring manager or a headhunter is really get to know the individual.
Absolutely.
Certainly, I know many a man who might be in a same-sex relationship who benefits from a stay-at-home partner or the ability to singularly focus. And so I think the key is you can't make assumptions. You have to get to know the person and understand what's driving them, what motivates them, and what flexibility they have to take on a big job, to travel, to double down when a crisis might require.
Yeah. And there are some key things that you had said earlier on I wanted to go back to. One was about tapping women on the shoulder because they might not put themselves forward for things. And, I can't remember the statistics that women will rule themselves out if they don't match, say, 80% of the job spec, whereas men will jump in for 60%. There's another thing that you said that's just slipped my mind. I'll come back to that. Where are you finding your people? One of the key pushbacks we get from organizations around being more diverse in their recruitment and, narrowing or going after the 30% club, having more representation of women in senior positions, etc., is that they're not applying, or the recruitment company isn't shortlisting these people for us. How do you find your people? How do you help create much more diversity?
No, that's a really good question, Andrea. And there's no question, my colleagues and I at Sapphire Partners have to look much harder.
Yeah.
And it could be a matter of the women or ethnic minorities often keep their head down and are very focused on the job in front of them. They can be very grateful and exceedingly loyal. And it might be that they're juggling a lot of responsibilities outside of the office. So my colleagues and I work extra hard to go to where we think those candidates are. We speak at a lot of events where we think women or minorities might be well represented. We go out of our way to get to know people when they might be in transition. We are very generous with our time. If someone has had a bumpy exit from a company, for example, and giving them feedback on their CV, perhaps on their LinkedIn profile, and being a supportive shoulder for them to lean on. Maybe also giving them the feedback they need to hear, that perhaps they need to go in at a level where they might be perhaps a little bit overqualified, but then if they can prove themselves, if they've had a bumpy exit, and then get back on that trajectory. We find it can be hard for individuals to know where to go for good career advice.
Yes.
A consultant might be trying to sell you on a particular role in front of them.
Yeah.
And it might be that it's a great opportunity, but roles don't always come along in a naturally opportunistic way. You can't look at 2 or 3 opportunities at the same time and do a cost-benefit analysis across them. And careers are absolutely winding roads.
Yeah.
And companies might get acquired, really good bosses might jump ship.
Yeah.
You have to be prepared for the unexpected. You have to be incredibly resilient. And the bumps in a road, I'm convinced, make one a better leader and future professional. But sometimes women can take those bumps more personally.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, it wasn't me, I couldn't have done anything different.
It's just so powerful, a number of things you've just said, and I can see that building a real relationship with your network of candidates, rather than just looking to place a person in a role, is a big part of the way that you work. Tell us some more about the relationships that you think support women or minority ethnics in their career progression.
Well, this is where I'd love to talk a bit about the important role of mentors and sponsors.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly this terminology wasn't around when I started my career a few decades ago, but I think having individuals you can look up to, whether you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s, is incredibly important. A mentor who you can go to for advice, maybe they've been in your shoes, they can relate to where you've been, and role models are also important. So I recall reading a lot of magazines and newspapers, voraciously looking for people that I could look up to when I was younger, and saying, all right, there's the first woman CEO of a UK PLC, was an American woman who, she was a good 25 or 30 years older than me. But I thought, all right, if she can do it, then maybe I can do it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And sponsors play a different role than mentors. And sponsors can pound the table for you when you're not in the room. They will certainly put their currency or capital, human capital, at risk on your behalf. And finding people who can play those roles for you at different stages of your career is incredibly important. Many companies will have formal schemes to help you find a mentor or to help you find a sponsor, but certainly many companies do not. So I think it's important for the individual to identify who can play those roles in your career at which different stages.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to hear you say that. I was going to ask a question, a very similar question, along those lines, going down the intersectional route, though, where you have women who are, women, but also of ethnic minorities. Certainly within this context, we had a great conversation with the CEO of Westminster City Council the other day, and he was talking about. In this context, they haven't a word. I don't know if it's they made it up or where it came from, but then now actually, rather than talk about ethnic minorities, they talk about global majority. Because actually, what they're saying is, in this context, maybe in the UK or in the US or in the Western world, yes, those people or people of color, etc., might be ethnic minorities, but actually, they're the global majority. That's the language that they use there. So if we use that language even just for a moment, when you are if you are a woman of global majority, in this context ethnic minority, what does a good sponsor, mentor look like to you? Should they be people who look just like you, or should they be different? Any recommendations or thoughts around that?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think you should look for mentors or sponsors who you can learn from. I don't think it should be important that they look like you.
Right.
And actually, some of the best mentors and sponsors I've had have been men who've been in really important decision making and influence roles. I think it would narrow the pool too much to look for mentors and sponsors who look like you,
especially if they don't exist at that level, and you're the first. Yeah.
And because it can be uncomfortable or awkward being the only woman in a team or a big division, or the only person of color. And so, that they're finding allies who can help you understand how to build relationships with that colleague who might appear very different from you, or who might be much older than you, who may have had much more of a traditional background or career track. And, you need to look below the surface. Someone might, we had a candidate who was a very senior gray-haired man. He had a fabulous cut glass British accent. He'd gone to the best boarding schools and universities in the UK. And on the surface, he looked like he had been born with a silver spoon in his mouth. In reality, he was a fabulous example of socioeconomic mobility. And he was the first from his family to go to university. He was the youngest of 8 children. None of his siblings had gone to university.
Oh. And
it was only really getting to know him and probing about, so tell me about your parents and tell me about where you grew up, that you learned any of that. And, he was a fabulous supporter and champion of mine. But if I had just judged him on superficial things, I wouldn't have realized what a great ally he would be to me and to some of the candidates I was promoting.
That's such a great point, because it's the same thing that we do in reverse with gender and with ethnic minorities, is we make these assumptions and judgments based on what we can see without getting to know the person. So to your point, that in all of this, get to understand the drivers, motivations, skills, talent of the person in front of you, regardless of preconceptions you might have from the way they look. I know McKinsey had done research some time ago to show that the loyalty that they get, especially from women when they support them through the different stages of life, once they've been through those very busy, exhausting years of toddlers and so on, if companies support them, they end up with a really engaged, very loyal person because they felt supported by the company. What have you been seeing in the space of things that we're looking for now post-COVID, not just as women primarily, but candidates in general post-COVID? What are we looking for in terms of feeling cared for and seen by organizations?
I think that if I can use a bit of lingo, I think the employee value proposition
Yeah.
has changed.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think candidates, and especially women, if I can generalize, really want to have impact and want to understand that the role they're going into is one where they can make a difference.
Yeah.
And being able to be successful as a senior leader takes a huge amount of energy and time. And if you're not spending that time with your partner or your children, you want to see that you're not just one of thousands of partners. You want to see that you really have an ability to move the needle, whether it comes to launching a new product or building a new service. And that sense of why I'm going to make a difference to this company is a huge influence when it comes to being able to attract and retain.
Mm-hmm.
I guess secondly, that it going back to a lot of what this podcast is about is the importance of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
People don't usually leave a company, they leave a boss.
Yeah.
And so forming that connection when you're trying to recruit someone to your team, whether it's an internal recruit or an external, and my role as a headhunter is not to own the relationship, it's to try to make sure that the candidate and their hiring manager have that connection and that relationship. And yes, I want the candidate to stay and be successful, not just because of the relationship with that hiring manager, but the broader opportunity. And that relationships change, and finding making sure that the chemistry is right in terms of can that individual learn from the person they're working for? Is there enough challenge as well as upside? Is there enough of a safety net? And clearly no candidate is perfect or is ever the finished article. So I need to be clear with my client on here's what Jenny or Joe needs to work on. Here's why they're also going to be so successful and impactful in that role.
Amazing.
Yes. I was going to ask you a slightly different question, actually, though, Kate. Given your career of, as you say now, a few decades, the successes you've enjoyed, I can't imagine that it's been just a walk in the park for you. There will have been challenges. I'm sure it's been a very interesting journey. But from a relationship perspective, building healthy relationships, the focus here. What would you say are the highlights and the lowlights of your journey as you've gone on this journey? Is there any one that stands out for you, and highlights, lowlights, anything like that? And I'm looking for examples here that just might give people some hope out there. Things will resonate with the audience listening. As a woman on this journey, yeah, that was a really wow, yeah, or that one didn't really work so well for me. Anything in that come to mind?
So in terms of highlights, I would probably reference when I was awarded my CBE.
Yes.
And
congratulations again on that.
I've been leading my search firm for a good 18 years at the time. A lot of what I do is behind the scenes, or I can't talk about, or it can be very fragmented.
Yeah.
And obviously I was incredibly proud, but what I was overwhelmed by was the messages I got when the news was public, and the people who I was shocked that they remembered me, or they remembered the advice I'd given them, or the conversation we'd had 10, 15, 20 years ago, and that they'd been cheering for me or rooting for me or watching the progress of Sapphire. And individuals who were chairing big companies or CEOs, as well as people who had taken career breaks. And I started trying to reply to every message personally, and there were too many.
Oh.
And so it was really humbling. And while I've touched, I thought, a more finite number of people, and there were many more ripples in the puddle than I had realized.
No.
And so clearly there are many people doing great work when it comes to promoting diverse talent. And so also I think the fact that my work had been recognized has given others the confidence that they need to also keep pushing, even if it sometimes feels like you're pushing water uphill.
Yeah. And if I could jump in there for just a second, for our international audience who may not be familiar with the CBE, this is not the member of the British Empire or the officer. This is the commander. Unlike, who was it? I think it was Idi Amin, who I think he may have been given, or maybe he gave himself the title of CBE, but he referred to his as conqueror of the British Empire. I don't think it's quite that. But it is a significant recognition here, commander of the most excellent of the British Empire. So congrats to us, from us too, on that. Some fabulous work there. And any thoughts on lowlights? Were there any that came to mind on the journey?
No, absolutely. And I do think that we don't talk enough about the bumps in the road, and everyone has them in their careers. And I think you learn a lot from those bumps, and it certainly taught me resilience. And in my time at JP Morgan, I was frustrated at the challenges of getting promoted from being a VP to a managing director. When I had significant responsibilities, everyone thought I was already a managing director. And I realized that, unfortunately, given the platform I had, that promotion was going to be really difficult to come my way. Because while I was the COO of a major division, I wasn't a rainmaker when I was in that MD promotion cycle. And so my learning from that bump was actually the importance of getting really good feedback. And so as much as I was doing a great role and getting a 10 out of 10, there wasn't anything that I could have done differently. And so it took some brave peers and bosses saying, Kate, it's not that you're not doing a great job. This role is not going to get you to that managing director role. And as much as it was hard for me to hear and frustrating and kind of deeply demotivating, getting that really unvarnished feedback was vital. Yeah. And I do worry that perhaps women especially don't get enough criticism, unvarnished feedback, perhaps a better word, that because no one wants to hurt your feelings, or they're worried you might cry. And I think that's something men perhaps benefit. If let's say, John, you did a lousy job at something once, afterwards your boss or colleague probably would have said, John, you really could have done A, B, and C better. Yeah. And you'd say, okay, you pull up your socks, and you would remember that feedback. Whereas if Andrea, in that same scenario, I worry that Andrea might not have gotten that feedback because her boss didn't want her to get emotional. And so Andrea didn't have the same learning experience that you would have from a difficult performance. And so I've certainly learned from that in terms of giving people really direct feedback. It might be something that's really superficial. Once we had a candidate who really didn't dress appropriately. And while their content and their experience was fabulous, the first impression they made was awful, just because of the really superficial way of how they were dressed. I put on my brave boots and gave her that feedback. So I'd like to think that will benefit her longer term.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because I think leaders in general struggle with this idea of feedback, only think of feedback as criticism without the context of a really trusting relationship. So some of the work that we do is, how do you build that trusting relationship? Habit 4, how do you connect before you correct, so that when you correct, people know you have their back rather than just being on their back. And that's especially now where we're not in the same co-location all the time, with hybrid working and not as visible, being able to give meaningful feedback and to help chart the course for the experience you need to get for the career you want to develop is such a big conversation for managers to get better at having. And I can hear that you do a lot of that, because you have oversight of industries, not just of companies, to be able to to help guide people. But talking about women and their the different response, the fact that we're more, we're as it's logical and more intuitive, or happier to reveal emotions. How do you help counsel women to be kind of confident and assertive, for want of a better word, in their role without changing the essence of who they are and trying to turn up more like men in a very aggressive or more aggressive environment, like in consulting and banking, the egos that you can face? How do you help women, as somebody said on a previous podcast, find that place of confidence and peace to be clear on what they want without changing their nature?
Mm-hmm.
That's such an important point, because I think far too many women suffer from imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said earlier, men are naturally present as more confident.
Yeah.
And whether it's, applying for roles or where they're less qualified for, or putting their hand up, realizing they might not get chosen, but you've got to put your hand up. I am a big fan of coaching, be it informal or formal. Even Roger Federer still uses a coach.
Exactly.
And I think it's especially important at transition times, if you're up for promotion or if you've had a setback. You could hire or go through your company to have an executive coach. You could rely on friends or family or your partner. Coaching comes in many different shapes and sizes. I do think women need to claim their achievements more. And so when I sit down with a candidate or a friend, one of my very, very first questions will usually be, brag a little. Tell me about something you're really proud of. Tell me about what you've achieved in your last role.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think starting with getting someone to own what are you good at
Mm-hmm.
is an important place to start, that any boss could do, but also any friend or colleague, if you see someone going through a tough time.
Mm-hmm.
Getting people to kind of center in, right, what should I be proud of? What have I helped deliver? And every career has ups and downs and challenges, and that sense of we all aren't good at everything.
Yep.
And so I'm a big believer in building on your strengths, but you certainly have to be aware of your weaknesses. And some individuals like to specialize and get really good at one thing. Others are much more generalists,
Mm-hmm.
and different roles and companies require different skill sets.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm conscious of time, and I know that there's so many other things I'd like to ask,
Lots of
but
angles.
let me ask this. What's the change? You've done so much in shifting the kind of numbers around women being represented at senior levels and more ethnicity. What's the change that you would like to see next? What's the thing that you are working towards, encouraging companies to get better at? What's the change you'd like to see, Kate?
I have a lot of ambitions.
Yeah. Go for it.
No, I think, careers are long. And looking at individuals, you're kind of taking off the blinders and realizing that the impact that one person, one successful hire can have in terms of attracting future talent. And there are far too many leadership teams that don't have enough women or ethnic minorities on them. And being able to help really ambitious companies improve their attraction and retention of leaders of all different shapes and sizes. That I know that is paying dividends in Britain, and that it's going to help our companies, organizations, and charities be much more successful. in serving their customers and serving their shareholders, inspiring the future generation. That British companies have an amazing wealth of diversity within them, and we have to get smarter at using our resources. There, for example, are many, because of English being a common language, there are so many talented African leaders I've met and Asian leaders who want to come work in London or the UK. And for the right role, they really will leave their opportunity in their community in Nigeria or Hong Kong or Singapore. And companies that can signal they're really open to high performing talent and can make great global opportunities happen will be super successful in the future.
Absolutely, on so many levels.
And I was just going to say one question for me is, that's great and great encouragement to the organizations, I guess, to get the environment right. But coming up the other side of the hill, is there any or one piece of advice that you would give to the individuals themselves, to the women, the people of ethnic diversity, the global majority people out there using that language? And is there one piece of advice you would give to them to just say this?
To be prepared, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
2 words, super simple: be brave.
Okay.
Be brave.
So putting your hand up, taking a stretch assignment, returning a headhunter's call, asking for a promotion or a project on the other side of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a big believer in Sheryl Sandberg's work around leaning in.
Mm-hmm.
And, careers are long. What's the worst that can happen?
Mm-hmm.
And not waiting for someone to tap you on the shoulder, but going out and seeking out challenges or great bosses or good opportunities. They don't always find you. So you have to be brave and go find them.
Love it.
Can I ask one last question before we wrap up?
Go for it.
Any shout outs you want to give in terms of the relationships that have supported you personally in what you've been able to achieve in your career?
Wow. Relationships have been so essential certainly to my later career. And in my early career, I focused more on technical skills and being really good at spreadsheets or strategic analysis. And I guess I woke up in my 40s to how important the people were, the sponsors and role models and mentors. And, it's what the people say when you're not necessarily in the room, and giving you the opportunity. Certainly many of my first clients at Sapphire have been former colleagues as well as peers from McKinsey or JP Morgan. And I continue to benefit hugely from having those former colleagues say, there's a search firm I think we should try. You maybe haven't heard of them, but they've done great work. And I wouldn't be here without the support of those colleagues, but also my team. And I'm only as good as the team I have alongside me.
Yeah.
So my colleagues from Sapphire have been great at helping to pick me up when a search maybe hasn't gone to plan or a pitch hasn't gone our way. And you have to focus on the things you can control.
Yeah. I'm not surprised you ended with the team, because you started, your very first words were, it takes a village. When we said congrats on what you achieved, you said it takes a village. So so much more that we could discuss, but I think we're going to have to honor your time and honor the time that's passed with the podcast.
There you go.
And say thank you so much for sharing your heart. Thank you so much for the great work that you're doing. Congrats again on the CBE, and we wish that you just go from strength to strength in making waves and getting a lot better parity that reflects our society in senior positions.
There's one important thing that I did forget.
Yep, go for it.
It's the importance of having the right partner and looking at the two of you And I wouldn't have appreciated it, certainly in my 20s or my 30s.
Mm.
But the most important career decision you make is choosing the right partner.
What a brilliant note to end on. I didn't want to ask because I didn't know your circumstances, but wonderful note to end on. Absolutely. Choose the right partner, somebody who will be in your corner, right? To help you fly. Amazing.
Amazing. So, Kate, how do people find out more if they want to find out about Sapphire Partners? They want to connect with yourself. What's the best way if people want to find out more? What do they do?
Thank you so much for asking, Jonathan. We have a great website called sapphirepartners.co.uk. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to link into people. I love giving career advice and meeting future leaders. So either of those two would be great.
Amazing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, a personal thank you from me. I was myself that reached out to you, and you were gracious in saying you would be happy to come and do this. So thank you again. So I think it's a wrap at that point.
It's a wrap. It's a wrap. We've been sent, just as a quick aside, we've been sending people to Sapphire Partners, and we do it with joy because of the work that you do, and we'll continue to do the same.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So to our audience around the world, we say thank you for being with us yet again. I'm not sure what number we're up to now. I think we're about 45 or thereabouts or something like that. But we're loving these conversations. We have some great people on here. So thanks for being with us, and we'll see you again next time.
Great.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, and you want to hear more, the best thing to do is subscribe. Then you'll never miss an episode. There's a new one every Friday. You can stay connected with us on social media at The 4 Habits for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and to participate in discussions related to the show. We always love to hear from you. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on your preferred platform to allow us to reach more listeners and help people around the globe radically transform the way they do relationships so they too can enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life.